What happened when every seamstress at the bridal shop saw my fiancé's text about my dress being attention-seeking? I was at the bridal boutique for my final fitting 6 weeks before the wedding. My mom was taking pictures and my sister kept talking about how the beading caught the light perfectly. The seamstress had just finished marking the adjustments when my phone buzzed with a text from Jay. That dress better not be one of those ridiculous attention-seeking ball gowns. My family already thinks you're too much. Keep it simple, not like those pretentious dresses you keep showing me on Pinterest. I stared at my phone for probably 20 seconds, feeling my stomach drop while Nadia, the seamstress, was still pinning the hem. She noticed I'd gone completely still and asked if everything was okay. I showed her my phone and when she read it, her face transformed. "Diana, ladies, we need everyone here now," she called out. Within seconds, 8 women surrounded my platform. Nadia read the text aloud. "That dress better not be one of those attention-seeking ball gowns." The boutique went silent. Then this woman looking for a tiara said, "What kind of trash?" Another bride trying on veils turned around. "Girl, is that your fiancé? That's controlling as hell." Diana, the owner, looked at my simple A-line, then at me. "Is this what you really wanted?" I shook my head and pointed to the window display, the massive ball gown I'd been dreaming about. "Then we're switching, right now." As they helped me into the ball gown, I started tearing up. I actually wanted this one originally, but Jay said, the mother of the bride woman cut me off. "Jay isn't wearing it. You are." The dress had silver beading, layers of tulle, an 8-foot train. It was everything I wanted, but Jay didn't like. Diana studied the dress. "You want crystals, sweetheart?" I nodded excitedly, and Linda started bringing them out. "Let's make this dress blind people." I watched the dress transform as she started hand sewing them on. The teenage girl shopping for prom with her mom said, "You're literally glowing right now." Sophie, another seamstress, offered to add embroidery. Silver thread climbing up from the hem. "It'll take hours, but screw it, I'm getting paid overtime." Nadia grabbed more crinolines. "We can make this huge. Would you like that?" I nodded again. "Like, can't fit through doors huge?" I smiled, and before I knew it, the skirt got bigger and bigger. I actually started laughing. "Jay is going to lose his mind." Nadia responded, "What's he gonna say?" "Oh no, my wife is beautiful." I was trying not to cry with joy. Diana then brought out a cathedral veil, 15 feet long, pearl edges. "Try it." When she placed it on my head, everyone went quiet. "Wow," the other bride said. "You look like an actual princess." I looked at myself and felt beautiful instead of too much. 4 hours of dress later, I was completely transformed. "Wait until Jay sees this at the altar," Nadia said with an evil grin. "He's getting a goddamn show for free." I walked out and texted Jay that everything was set and he didn't have a thing to worry about. He replied saying he hopes I understand where he was coming from. I sent a smiley face and didn't say anything else. He wasn't seeing the dress until the big day anyway. On the day of, I wore my huge ball gown with pride, and when those church doors opened, the entire congregation gasped. The sunlight hit every crystal, creating rainbows dancing across the walls. Jay's face went white, but the craziest part was that his mother, who apparently said a dress like this was too much, was the first to grab her husband's arm and gasped, "Oh my god, she's absolutely magnificent." Walking down that aisle, the 12-foot train flowing behind me like liquid starlight, Jay stood frozen at the altar. His grandmother said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Now that's a wedding dress." Jay, you lucky boy. He just stood there with his jaw clenched, unable to respond. The entire ceremony, his family kept whispering. His mother leaned over to his aunt. "Have you ever seen anything more beautiful?" His cousins taking photos. His sister mouthing stunning at me from the bridesmaid line. Jay had to just stand there and take it, forcing a smile whenever anyone looked at him. At the reception, his mother cornered us. "Darling, this dress is extraordinary. Like something from a fairy tale. Jay must be so proud to have such a stunning bride." Jay mumbled something while grinding his teeth. His college friends surrounded us. "Dude, your wife looks like royalty. You're punching way above your weight, Jay." He had to laugh along, because what could he say? Jay's grandmother pulled me aside within earshot of him. "This is what a real bride looks like." His mother posted photos throughout the reception with captions like, "My stunning daughter-in-law," and "The most beautiful bride I've ever seen." Jay just had to stand there watching his family fawn over the exact thing he'd tried to prevent. That night in the honeymoon suite, Jay had me backed against the wall. "You humiliated me. That dress was ridiculous. You looked absurd." I tried my best to defend myself. Tell him this was what I wanted and that it was our day, not just his day. That's when he got angry. He raised his fist and punched it against the wall. But there was something he didn't know. I knew he'd get angry, so I came prepared. "Jason Emilius Carlson," his mother yelled outside our door. Jay went completely still with his fist still stuck in the drywall next to my head. His whole body tensed up and I could see the color drain from his face as his mother's voice echoed through the door again. I stepped sideways away from him and my legs were shaking, so bad I had to grab the dresser to steady myself. My hands fumbled with a deadbolt and chain lock while Jay yanked his fist out of the wall, sending bits of plaster onto the carpet. The door swung open and his mother stood there in her silk pajamas with her arms crossed, looking ready for war. Her eyes went straight to the hole in the wall about 6 inches from where my head had been. She looked at the white dust on Jay's knuckles, then at my face, and I watched her expression change from angry to something worse. She knew exactly what had happened without me saying a word. Her face got this hard look I'd never seen before, and she pointed at Jay, then at the door. Jay started to say something, but she cut him off with that same tone she'd used in the hallway. He grabbed his jacket off the chair and stormed past her without looking at either of us. The door slammed behind him and we heard his footsteps stomping down the hall toward the elevator. His mother walked over to the hole and ran her fingers along the jagged edges while shaking her head. My phone buzzed with a text, and I looked down to see Jay had already messaged me from the lobby. He said I was being dramatic, and that hitting the wall wasn't the same as hitting me, and that I needed to stop making such a big deal out of nothing. I handed my phone to his mother and watched her read it. Her jaw clenched and she handed it back without saying anything for a few seconds. I told her I couldn't stay in this room tonight and that I needed to get away from him to think. She nodded and pulled out her phone to call the front desk. Within minutes, she had arranged another room for me 3 floors down and told them to block Jay from getting a key card for it. She helped me throw my clothes into my suitcase, not bothering to fold anything, just getting me out of there as fast as possible. We took a service elevator to avoid running into Jay in the lobby. The new room was smaller, but it felt safer knowing he couldn't get in. She made sure I had everything I needed and checked that the door locked properly. At the door, she pulled me into a tight hug and I felt her trembling. She whispered that she was sorry she hadn't seen this coming and promised to keep Jay away from me tonight. After she left, I sat on the bed for a minute just breathing. My hands were still shaking when I pulled out my phone to text my mom and sister. I kept it simple, just saying there had been an incident with Jay, and I was safe but in a different room. Both of them responded within seconds asking if they should drive over. My mom said she could be there in 20 minutes and my sister offered to come get me right away. I told them not to come yet because I needed time to process everything. They both said they loved me and would be ready whenever I needed them. I went back up to the original room while Jay was still in the lobby. The hole was still there with plaster dust on the carpet below it. I took photos from every angle, making sure to get close-ups of how deep his fist had gone into the wall. Then I sat at the desk and wrote down everything that had happened starting from when we got to the room. I noted the exact time he'd punched the wall and what he'd said right before. My hands got steadier as I documented each detail. I screenshotted all his texts, including the ones from earlier in the day where he'd complained about the dress making him look bad. I saved everything to my cloud storage and emailed copies to myself. The next morning, I went down to the hotel restaurant early, hoping to avoid Jay. His mother was already there waiting at a corner table with coffee. She stood up when she saw me and pulled out my chair. We sat there for a minute before she started talking about Jay's father. She said he'd had the same kind of temper when they first got married, and she'd spent years hoping he would change. Her voice got quiet when she told me Jay's dad had put holes in walls too, and she'd always made excuses for him. She said it took him 10 years and therapy to get better, but by then she'd already learned to walk on eggshells around him. She stirred her coffee and admitted she'd been worried when she saw Jay getting angry over small things, but kept telling herself he wasn't as bad as his father had been. We were halfway through breakfast when Jay showed up at our table holding a bouquet of roses. Jay's mother showing up at that exact moment with him still mid-punch makes me wonder if she was already listening outside their door. The timing seems too perfect, especially since she's in pajamas like she was ready for this specific situation to happen tonight. He asked if we could talk privately, so he could apologize the right way. I looked him straight in the eye and told him no. I said I needed time to figure out what had happened and what I wanted to do next. He started to argue, saying we needed to work this out now, but his mother stood up and told him to leave. She used that same firm voice from last night, and he actually listened, though his face turned red. He set the flowers on the table and walked away, but I could see him clenching his fists as he left. His mother pushed the flowers to the side, and we finished our breakfast in silence. After we paid the check, I stood up and told his mother I wasn't going on the honeymoon. I said I needed to stay at my own place for a while to figure things out. She nodded and said she understood completely. When we went back upstairs, Jay was waiting in the hallway near our room. His face turned red when I told him about postponing the trip, but with his mother standing right there watching him, he just nodded stiffly. He said we'd talk when I was ready, though his jaw was clenched, so tight I could see the muscles jumping. His mother helped me pack my things while Jay stood in the doorway watching us fold clothes and zip up suitcases. I grabbed my honeymoon luggage and my wedding night bag and carried them down to the lobby. Jay's mother walked beside me carrying my dress bag and didn't say a word about any of it. She loaded everything into her car and drove me home without turning on the radio or trying to make small talk. When we got to my apartment building, she helped me carry everything inside even though it took 3 trips. Before she left, she wrote her direct cell number on a piece of paper and pressed it into my hand. She told me to call that number if Jay showed up when I didn't want him there. The way she said it made me feel both safer and more scared at the same time. After she left, I sat on my couch surrounded by luggage and started making phone calls. I spent the next 2 days on hold with airlines and hotels trying to cancel our honeymoon reservations. Each customer service person asked why I was canceling, and I had to explain over and over that plans had changed. Some places charged cancellation fees that made me wince, but I kept going because I knew I needed this space to think. The travel insurance company wanted documentation, and I had to fill out forms explaining why we weren't going. Every call felt like admitting my marriage had failed before it even started, but I pushed through each one. Between calls, I'd look at the wedding photos my sister had already posted online and wonder how everything went so wrong so fast. On the 3rd day, I called Myra Lynn at work to explain what happened. I told her about the wall and asked if she could cover for me if I needed time off. She immediately said yes and asked what else she could do to help. She offered to handle my projects or just come over if I needed someone to talk to. Her voice was so normal and steady that I almost started crying right there on the phone. After hanging up with her, I searched online for therapists who specialized in relationship control issues. I found one whose website talked about helping people recognize unhealthy patterns. My insurance website showed she was covered, and I called to make an appointment. The receptionist was kind and got me in for the following week. When she sent the confirmation email, seeing that appointment on my calendar felt like the first real step toward understanding what I'd been living with. The week passed slowly, with Jay sending texts every day that I didn't answer. When the appointment day came, I drove to the therapist's office feeling nervous but determined. She had me fill out intake forms asking about my relationship history and current concerns. In her office, she listened while I explained about the dress and the wall and everything that led up to it. Then she pulled out a piece of paper and started going through something called a power and control wheel. She used the term coercive control and showed me a checklist of warning signs. As she read each one, I recognized them from my relationship with Jay. He'd isolated me from friends by complaining whenever I went out. He'd monitored my spending and questioned every purchase. He'd criticized my appearance unless I dressed how he wanted. He'd used anger to make me afraid to disagree with him. By the time she finished the list, I'd checked almost every single box. It was both validating to see it wasn't my imagination and terrifying to realize how bad things had gotten. She gave me articles to read, and we scheduled another appointment for the next week. That night, Jay sent a long email that I saw on my phone. The subject line said, "I'm sorry, but you need to understand." In it, he explained how the dress had humiliated him in front of everyone. He said I'd made him lose control by deliberately choosing something he'd asked me not to wear. He insisted I should have known better than to embarrass him like that on our wedding day. He wrote 3 pages about how his reaction was my fault for not respecting his wishes. I forwarded the whole thing to my therapist without adding any comment. Then I found the business card of an attorney friend from college and forwarded it to her too, asking if she had time to talk. I didn't respond to Jay at all, even though he sent 2 follow-up emails asking if I'd read it. The next day, my mom came over with groceries and we sat at my kitchen table for hours. She admitted she'd had concerns about Jay for months before the wedding. She said she'd noticed how he always had to approve my outfits when we went to family dinners. She'd seen him get angry when I laughed too loud at my dad's jokes. She told me she'd wanted to say something but didn't want to seem like an interfering mother. We both cried and she held my hand across the table. She promised to support whatever decision I made going forward, whether that meant working things out or walking away. She said she just wanted me to be safe and happy. After she left, I checked my social media and found my inbox full of messages. Several were from women who'd been been at the boutique that day. They'd seen the wedding photos online and wanted to congratulate me on the gorgeous dress. Diana had written that I looked absolutely stunning, and she was proud I'd worn what I wanted. Sophie sent a message saying the embroidery looked perfect in the pictures. Even the teenage girl who'd been shopping for prom had found me and said I looked like a princess. Their messages reminded me that standing up for myself with the dress had been the right choice, even if it led to this mess. I screenshotted each message to save them. While going through emails, I decided to check our joint bank account to see if the honeymoon refunds had been processed. That's when I discovered Jay had already withdrawn half the money without telling me. The transaction was dated 3 days ago, with a transfer to his personal account. Seeing those numbers on the screen hit different from everything else. The emotional stuff was hard, but this was concrete and deliberate theft of money that was half mine. He'd taken exactly half of each refund down to the penny, like he'd calculated what he thought he deserved. I took screenshots of every transaction and printed out the statements showing the withdrawals. My hands were shaking as I realized he'd been planning this while sending apology emails. I printed out 3 copies of the bank statements and put them in a folder with all the other screenshots I'd been collecting. The next morning, I called an attorney friend from college who specialized in family law, and she squeezed me in that afternoon. Her office was downtown in one of those old buildings with marble floors, and I sat in the waiting room clutching my folder while other people avoided eye contact. When she called me in, I spread everything out on her desk and watched her face get more serious with each page. She explained that in our state, I could file for either annulment or divorce, and that annulment was harder to prove, but would basically erase the marriage like it never happened. Divorce would take longer, but was more straightforward, and she could help me protect my assets during the process. She made copies of everything and told me to open my own bank account immediately and move my direct deposit there. I left her office feeling both scared and relieved to have a plan. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Jay's mother asking if we could meet for coffee because she was struggling with what to do. She said she loved her son but couldn't ignore what happened and needed to talk to someone who understood. I agreed, but told her it had to be somewhere public and during the day when I felt safe. We met at a Starbucks downtown the next morning, and she looked like she hadn't been sleeping well. Her hands shook when she picked up her coffee, and she told me that Jay's father had the same anger problems when they first got married. She said it took years of therapy and almost losing his family before he finally changed, and she was terrified Jay was going down the same path. She pulled out her checkbook right there and wrote me a check for $5,000 saying it was for whatever I needed, whether that was moving expenses or therapy or legal fees. She also said she'd pay for Jay's anger management if he'd actually go, and that she supported whatever boundaries I needed to set. I thanked her and we hugged in the parking lot, and I could feel her crying against my shoulder. 3 days later, I asked Myra from work to come with me to the apartment to pack more of my things while Jay was at his office. We brought boxes and garbage bags and worked fast because I didn't know if he might come home early. There were apology notes everywhere on the fridge and the bathroom mirror and stuck to my pillow, all saying how sorry he was and promising to change. The timing of Jay taking exactly half of each refund while sending those apology emails makes me wonder if he's been planning his moves more carefully than his angry outbursts suggest. I took photos of each one for my records, but didn't read them carefully because I knew they'd just make me doubt myself. We were loading boxes into my car when Jay's car pulled into the parking lot and my stomach dropped. He got out and started walking toward us, and I could see he'd been crying from how red his eyes were. Myra stepped between us while I kept loading the car, and Jay kept saying he just wanted 5 minutes to explain. I told him we could talk, but not alone and not inside, and he stood there in the parking lot telling me how the dress thing was a misunderstanding and he never meant to scare me. Myra kept her hand on her phone the whole time, ready to call 911 if needed, while I finished putting boxes in the trunk. When I closed it, Jay asked if I'd consider couples counseling, and I could see how desperate he was. I said I'd go to 1 session for closure, but that didn't mean I was taking him back, and he nodded so fast I thought his head might fall off. The counseling appointment was a week later at an office that smelled like vanilla candles and had those white noise machines in every room. The therapist was this older woman with glasses who let Jay talk first, and I watched him spin the whole story to make himself sound reasonable. He kept coming back to the dress, saying I'd humiliated him in front of his family and that any man would have been upset. The therapist stopped him and asked if he thought violence was an acceptable response to feeling humiliated, and he got defensive, saying punching a wall wasn't violence toward me. She pulled out a worksheet about abuse patterns and went through it point by point, showing him how his behavior fit the pattern of minimizing and deflecting and blame shifting. Jay's face got redder with each point, and he finally said we were ganging up on him just like the women at the boutique did. The therapist looked at me, and I could see in her eyes that she understood exactly what I was dealing with. After the session ended, I told Jay in the parking lot that I wanted a formal separation agreement with no contact for 60 days. He started to argue, but I mentioned that my attorney had already prepared paperwork for a restraining order if he preferred that option instead. His face went white, and he agreed to the separation, and I watched him sign the papers my attorney had prepared. Back at work the next Monday, everyone kept asking about the honeymoon and why I looked tired, and I could hear people whispering when I walked past. Myra started eating lunch with me every day and would redirect conversations when people got too nosy. She'd jump in with work questions or suddenly remember an urgent email we needed to discuss, and I was so grateful to have her there. Some people figured out something was wrong because I'd moved my wedding ring to my right hand, but most people just assumed we were having normal newlywed adjustments. Then that afternoon, I was scrolling through Facebook on my break when I saw one of Jay's college friends had posted a meme about crazy wives who ruin their husbands' lives with their drama. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence, and I knew it was about me even though he didn't use names. I took a screenshot and added it to my growing folder of documentation, even though part of me wanted to comment and tell everyone the real story. Instead, I blocked him and made my profile private and tried to focus on my work while my phone kept buzzing with texts from Jay that I didn't read. That afternoon, I called the attorney my friend had recommended and got an appointment for the next morning before work. The office was in this old building downtown with creaky floors, and I sat in the waiting room looking at all the divorce pamphlets while other people waited too. The attorney was this older woman with gray hair who took notes while I explained everything from the dress to the wall punching to Jay showing up at work. She pulled out forms and started marking sections with sticky notes explaining that formal separation papers would protect me financially and legally while we figured out next steps. She showed me how to separate our joint checking account and the one credit card we'd opened together for wedding expenses, and said it was good we didn't have much shared debt yet. I signed papers and she made copies and gave me a folder with everything organized by colored tabs. The retainer fee took most of my savings, but I knew I needed this protection. That night around 11, my apartment buzzer started going off over and over, and I could see Jay on the security camera screen holding flowers and looking up at my window. My phone lit up with text after text saying he just wanted to talk and that we could work this out if I'd give him 5 minutes. I didn't answer the door or respond to the texts, but called building security from my cell phone and watched on the camera as the security guard walked up and talked to Jay. The guard wrote something on his clipboard while Jay gestured at the building, and I could see him getting more upset. After about 10 minutes, Jay finally left and the guard came up to my door with an incident report for me to sign. He said they'd add Jay to the restricted access list and gave me a copy of the report with the timestamps and everything documented. The next few days, I gathered all my documentation, including the hotel photos and the texts and the incident report, and my attorney helped me file for a temporary protective order. She explained the process while we filled out the paperwork at the courthouse, and the clerk gave us a date for next week when the judge would review everything. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt both relieved that I was taking action and scared about what Jay would do when he got served. Sure enough, 2 days later, my phone rang, and it was Jay's mother sounding tired and sad. She told me Jay had called her crying about the protective order, and she was conflicted because he was her son, but she understood why I needed it. She promised she'd talk to him about respecting boundaries and getting real help this time, not just promises to change. I thanked her for calling and for understanding, and we both cried a little before hanging up. That weekend, my mom and sister came over with boxes and spreadsheets they'd made of all the wedding gifts. We spent hours going through everything and matching gifts to the guest list, and making labels for what needed to go back to which person. My sister handled the expensive stuff like the kitchen mixer and the china, while my mom wrote notes explaining the situation briefly and thanking people for their kindness. It was sad work seeing all these gifts meant to start a marriage that was already ending, but having them there made it feel less overwhelming. We ordered pizza, and they stayed until everything was packed and labeled and ready to ship. Monday, I had my regular therapy appointment, and we spent the whole time working on rebuilding my sense of worth after years of Jay making me feel like I was too much. The therapist had me list times Jay had criticized my choices, and we looked at the pattern starting way before the wedding dress. She pointed out how every suggestion about my clothes or my friends or my hobbies was really him trying to make me smaller and easier to control. The dress situation was just the biggest and most obvious example, but the control had been there all along in smaller ways I'd ignored or explained away. After therapy, I went straight to the bank to close our joint credit card, and the banker helped me understand the cancellation fees and how to handle the remaining balance. I kept every receipt and statement from my attorney's files and opened my own individual credit card with a small limit to start rebuilding my credit separately. Each financial step felt like cutting another rope that tied me to Jay's control over my life. Myra helped me find a sublet across town through her cousin who was traveling for 3 months and needed someone reliable to watch her place. We spent a whole Saturday loading boxes into Myra's truck and driving back and forth between my old apartment and the new place. The sublet was smaller but had good locks and a doorman, and most importantly, Jay didn't know where it was and didn't have keys. Myra helped me set up the kitchen and hang my clothes, and by evening I was exhausted, but finally felt safe behind a door Jay couldn't just walk through. A week later, my attorney forwarded me a letter from Jay's lawyer proposing that we both cool off, and I dropped the protective order request to avoid unnecessary legal complications. My attorney explained this was really about Jay not wanting a legal record of domestic violence that could affect his job and future relationships. She helped me write a response saying I'd proceed with the protective order as planned, but would consider negotiating other aspects of the separation. During my next therapy session, we went through my old text messages together, and I finally saw the pattern that had been there for years. Every suggestion about my appearance that I thought was helpful was actually criticism, and every opinion about my friends that seemed protective was really isolation, and every preference about our plans that seemed reasonable was actually control. My therapist helped me print out the worst ones and highlight the manipulation tactics so I could see them clearly instead of making excuses like I used to do. My attorney called the next morning to schedule our settlement conference for 3 weeks out and explained what I could expect from the process. She went through the paperwork with me and said since we had minimal assets and no kids, this should be straightforward if Jay cooperated. I took notes while she talked about how the mediator would handle things and what questions they might ask me. She reminded me to stay calm no matter what Jay said and to let the lawyers do most of the talking. Jay's mother calling to say she understands why I need the protective order while also saying he's her son. That's quite a position for her to take. Makes me wonder what else she knows about his behavior that she hasn't said out loud. After hanging up, I started organizing all my documents into folders, one for finances and one for the incidents I'd documented. That afternoon, Jay's mother texted asking if we could talk, and I agreed to a phone call since I wasn't ready to see her in person yet. She told me Jay had enrolled in an anger management program through his work and asked if I could respect his space while he worked on himself. I thanked her for letting me know but made it clear this didn't change my decision about the divorce. She sounded sad but said she understood and promised to keep supporting whatever boundaries I needed. Over the next few days, I worked on drafting my statement for court, writing and rewriting to make sure I stuck to facts without attacking Jay's character. I described the wall punching incident and the pattern of control without using emotional language or trying to make him look evil. My attorney reviewed it when I was done and said it was perfect because it focused on safety concerns rather than revenge. The morning of the settlement conference, I put on my most professional outfit and drove to the mediator's office with my stomach in knots. Jay was already there when I arrived, sitting at the far end of the conference table with his lawyer beside him. I took my seat at the opposite end with my attorney and tried not to look at him directly. The mediator started by explaining the process and asking both lawyers to present their clients' positions on asset division and support. My lawyer went first, outlining our request for a clean split of debts and assets with no ongoing financial ties. Jay's lawyer countered with some minor adjustments, but nothing unreasonable, which surprised me. Then the mediator asked if either of us wanted to speak, and Jay immediately raised his hand. He started telling the mediator that the dress situation at our wedding had started everything, and that I'd deliberately provoked him. The mediator cut him off and redirected him to focus on his own behavior and the safety concerns rather than my clothing choices. Jay's face got red, but his lawyer put a hand on his arm and he stopped talking. We spent another hour going through financial details and discussing the civil no-contact agreement my attorney had proposed. Jay kept trying to catch my eye across the table, but I stayed focused on the paperwork in front of me. When the mediator asked if I was willing to drop criminal charges if Jay signed the no-contact agreement, I said yes. It felt like the right balance between protecting myself and being able to move forward without years of court battles. Jay's lawyer whispered something to him, and after a long pause, Jay agreed to the terms. We reached an agreement where we each kept our own individual debts and split our small joint savings account down the middle. The relief of having everything in writing was stronger than the sadness I felt about what could have been. The mediator typed up the agreement right there, and we both signed it with our lawyers as witnesses. Walking out of that office knowing I'd never have to negotiate with Jay again felt like dropping a 100-pound weight off my shoulders. Back at my apartment, I started going through the wedding gifts we'd returned and calculating how much money I had for moving expenses and legal fees. Our families had been so generous, and now that money could help me start fresh instead of sitting in our joint account, I spent the evening writing thank you notes to everyone who'd given us gifts, including a brief explanation that Jay and I were separating. Each note was hard to write, but I kept them short and dignified without going into details about what had happened. My mom called that night, and I asked her and my sister to come over so we could talk about boundaries going forward. When they arrived, I made tea, and we sat in my small living room while I explained what I needed from them. I asked them not to give me updates about Jay unless it was something safety-related that I needed to know. They both agreed immediately, and my sister said she'd already unfollowed him on social media so she wouldn't be tempted to check. My mom held my hand and promised they'd focus on helping me heal instead of keeping tabs on what Jay was doing. A few days later, Jay's mother texted asking if we could meet for coffee one last time before everything was finalized. I agreed and suggested a coffee shop downtown where I'd feel comfortable in public. She was already there when I arrived, looking older and more tired than I'd ever seen her. She stood up and hugged me, and we both got a little teary before sitting down with our drinks. She apologized for not protecting me sooner and for not seeing the warning signs with her son. I told her it wasn't her fault and that I appreciated everything she'd done to support me since the wedding night. We talked for an hour about boundaries and how we both needed to move forward separately, even though we cared about each other. She understood this meant we couldn't stay in contact and that this was goodbye for our relationship too. When we hugged goodbye outside the coffee shop, we both knew it was the last time we'd see each other. 3 weeks later, my boss called me into her office for my quarterly review, and I sat down expecting the usual feedback about my spreadsheets and client calls. She closed the door and pushed a folder across the desk with my performance metrics and attendance record from the past few months. The numbers were solid even though I'd been dealing with everything, and she nodded while flipping through the pages. She mentioned how I'd kept my personal situation from affecting my work, and that several clients had complimented my professionalism during a difficult time. Then she slid another paper over showing a 5% raise effective immediately, which would help cover my new apartment costs. I thanked her and walked back to my desk feeling like at least one part of my life was moving in the right direction. That Thursday in therapy, we talked about what I wanted in future relationships instead of just processing what had happened with Jay. My therapist pulled out a worksheet about values and boundaries, and we filled it out together while I realized how clear I'd become about what I would and wouldn't accept. She suggested moving to bi-weekly sessions since I was handling things better, and I agreed, knowing I had the tools to cope now. The following Monday, I drove to the old apartment while Jay was at work to get my winter clothes and the kitchen stuff I'd left behind. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, and I packed quickly, checking each room against my list to make sure I had everything. I loaded the boxes into my car and left my key on the counter, knowing there was no reason to ever come back here again. 2 days later, the mailman handed me a thick envelope from the courthouse, and I opened it right there on my front steps. The divorce decree was official, along with a civil no-contact order that would keep Jay from showing up at my door again. I went inside and filed both documents in my new filing cabinet, these papers marking the official end of one chapter and the start of whatever came next. That weekend, I met with a landlord about a studio apartment on the sunny side of a building downtown with big windows and hardwood floors. The lease was in my name only, and I signed it feeling this strange mix of pride and relief while the landlord handed me the keys. On my way home, I stopped at a furniture store and bought myself a reading chair, soft blue fabric with a matching ottoman, something Jay would have called impractical, but I loved. Moving day came quickly, and Myra helped me carry boxes up 2 flights of stairs while we laughed about how light my stuff was without all of Jay's things. I arranged my new place exactly how I wanted it, with my books organized by color and my grandmother's quilt on the bed. That night, I sat in my new chair and posted on social media for the first time in months. Just a photo of my bookshelf with a caption about focusing on my next chapter. Within an hour, dozens of people had liked and commented with hearts and support, reminding me how many people actually cared about my happiness beyond Jay's circle. My phone buzzed with a text from my attorney saying Jay's mother had sent something through their office that I needed to acknowledge receipt of. The next morning, I went to pick up an envelope containing Jay's written apology letter and a certificate showing he'd completed 12 weeks of anger management. I signed the receipt form but didn't open the letter, putting it unopened in a box in my closet because his journey to become better wasn't my concern anymore. 6 months had passed since that wedding night when he'd punched the wall next to my head, and now I was picking out my own clothes every morning without worrying if they were too bright or too attention-seeking. I bought red lipstick because I liked how it looked and wore dresses with patterns because they made me happy and nobody got to have an opinion about it. Standing in my sunny apartment that morning, making coffee in my favorite mug with my music playing as loud as I wanted, I understood that the dress had never really been about a dress at all. It was about the right to be myself without asking permission, or making myself smaller to fit someone else's comfort zone. The ball gown with all those crystals and layers of tulle had been my first real act of choosing myself over someone else's demands. Now every single day I got to make 100 small choices that were entirely mine, from what I ate for breakfast to what I watched on TV to how late I stayed up reading. The freedom felt overwhelming sometimes, but mostly it felt like finally breathing after holding my breath for years. I was learning who I actually was when nobody was telling me who to be, and that person turned out to be someone I actually liked. Appreciate you hanging out and wondering through all this with me. Really interesting sharing these thoughts together. Catch you in the next one. And hey, like the video. It helps more than you think.